Hello ladies and gents, this is Robert Sykes and I'm going to walk you through real quick how to calculate your initial starting macros to plug into the Deeper State Cutting course. So here we are on the macro calculator page of the KetoSavage.com website. We have a couple directions here. I'm just going to walk you through it myself. There's two scenarios that I want to mention here. If you know what your maintenance caloric intake is, if you've been tracking your macros for quite some time, you know what intake is going to allow you to pretty much maintain that weight. You're not going to lose weight, you're not going to gain weight. Then feel free to use those starting calories with the ratios that we've prescribed. So if you know what your caloric intake is, it's basically at maintenance. Feel free to use that caloric intake to start the course with our prescribed ratios. If you don't know what your ratios and you don't know what your caloric intake is, then I highly encourage you to use this macro calculator to get a baseline established. We'll use a hypothetical example here. We'll say we have a gentleman that's 150 pounds and we'll say he's about 15% body fat. This is a sliding scale here. So we'll say he's about 15% body fat. A couple good ways to estimate your body fat percentage is, if you have access to an InBody or a DEXA scan or a bod pod, any of those are great. If you don't, you can get the pinch test, the caliper test. There's also like pictures online. A lot of images kind of illustrate people at different body fat percentages. You can kind of use those just as a kind of a baseline to see and compare kind of what you might be in that range. And this doesn't have to be on the money by any means. Like it's just an estimate. And I encourage you to kind of be conservative in your estimate. So if this individual, for instance, thinks he's about 12% or 13%, he might want to round up to 15 as opposed to rounding down to 10. At 15%, 150 pounds, this would put his body fat weight at about 22 pounds, lean body mass at 127, BMR, so basal metabolic rate at about 1,620 calories. This activity multiplier is another important step here, and this is also a sliding scale. I have got it basically set from average to extra active. An average individual will be someone that's fairly active, but is not necessarily going to the gym and killing it in the gym on a regular basis. I would imagine most people would fall into this bracket. If you're training consistently, going to the gym regularly, you might want to bump this up a little bit. For instance, for me, I keep mine at about 1.8 in the off season when I'm training 5 days a week. And then when I go into a competition prep, I bump this up to 1.9 or 2. I put a floor on it. I capped it at 1.5. I don't necessarily want to have your activity multiplier in the below 1.5 because then your caloric intake would be too low, be a little dangerously low. We don't want that. And you don't have to be going to the gym for this course to work for you. I encourage you to be active, to just move. You don't necessarily have to go to the gym, but just simply walking around your neighborhood, going outside, moving around. Proper nutrition and physical activity are symbiotic in nature, so they're only going to benefit each other. But yeah, it's capped at 1.5. So let's say this individual is a little bit above average at 1.6. That's going to put his TDEE, so total daily energy expenditure, at about 2,594 calories. And then there's an induction phase below that. There's actually multiple phases on this page, but we're only going to be focusing on the induction phase for this course. So that said, that's going to put his induction phase calories at about 1,816, his fat grams at about 161, protein grams at about 68, and carb grams at about 22. Now, there's a carb surplus below that, and this is a very important note. It says if carb grams are greater than 10 grams, add amounts over 10 to the daily protein grams. So in this instance, he's about 12 grams over 10, and we're just going to kind of round with this. So basically, you would add 10, 12 grams to the protein. So let's just say his starting macros are going to be 160 grams of fats, and then we'll just round up to 70 plus the 10. So we'll say 80 grams of protein and then 10 grams of carbs. That would be his starting macros, for instance. So that's kind of a good way to establish a starting point for your macros on this course. Again, if you know what your baseline is, if you've been tracking for a while and have a pretty good feel for what your maintenance level is, feel free to use that caloric intake with our prescribed ratios, and then we'll just hit the ground running.